Hey there, my fellow Torchlights. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about basically my thoughts for the new season and a review of sort of what we got in the season preview, as well as my plans for season start on Torchlight. I'll go over some of the builds that I think are going to be really strong, some of the options that I had for starting, as well as a couple of the hero changes. And then finally, we'll wrap up with my build for season start. Now, I won't have a full rundown of exactly what I'm going to do because we don't really have much. We're obviously not in game, but once I am, of course, in game, I will have the updates for everything I do alongside as I do it. Now, if you guys are new to the channel, you'll know that I post a lot of PoE content and PoE 2 content. Normally, I do about a couple of weeks of Torchlight whenever we get a new season for Torchlight, because I find that this is a very fun blaster game. I get to turn my brain off and I get to just play a game for fun. And usually that lasts for about 2 weeks or sometimes 3, depending on the season. And plus, we're on a bit of downtime from PoE 2, so yep. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into my thoughts about the reveal. The first thing that they sort of talked about in the reveal was they went over stuff like the new season mechanic. Now, the new season mechanic is basically a thing where you're sort of encountering these cards while you map, and basically each of these cards will have different effects. So there'll be something like maybe you have to dodge chariots, maybe you have to kill some mobs, and there's basically a bunch of different effects. And then eventually you could use these cards that you find to build a board with tons of loot that you could go and then farm in as basically side content. Which I think is a super cool system. I'm very enthused for the system, mostly because Torchlight, personally for me, has never really missed with a season mechanic before. Um, I've never really had a season mechanic that I didn't particularly enjoy. The one that I enjoyed the least was probably Cube Season, but even Cube Season was pretty good by all things considered. So yeah, I'm pretty excited for it. Now, the secondary part of the season mechanic is, of course, going into the progressive power, or how we usually get some sort of power creep mechanic, that basically a new way to scale your build. And so this season it's going to be destinies. The destinies are basically all of these things, and you have different types of fates and kismets, and what these will do is they will socket into your pack tree. So one big change this season is you can now equip battle pets and quantity pets at the same time. Now, personally, for me, I'm not a big fan of this because of the fact that, for me, well, I like to not spend money on the game. The first time I've ever spent on pets, usually I only buy the battle pass. The first time I spent on pets was last season. I spent about $20. I usually don't try to avoid spending money on this game because I want people to have like a frame of reference for where you can be if you religiously avoid spending money. But I figured last season I had a decent time, so I spent a little bit of money. Plus, I wanted a little bit more currency from the quant bets. Not gonna lie. And since I've been playing for 8 seasons, I felt like it was fine for me to spend about $20. But either way, the way that this works is you have micro and medium destinies, and then you have kismets, and then you have undetermined fates. So the kismets, as you can see, will slot into these slots right here. The micro and medium destinies will slot into the small slots here, and the undetermined fates, I believe, slot into the big slots over here. And you can see your limit for each of these, and the micro and medium destinies, I believe, give you like generic effects, so you'll get stuff like resistance, Spirit Magus empowerment effect, aura effect, movement speed, etc. The Kismets, which are these, usually have some sort of special effect that is hard to get elsewhere, or it'll be some sort of conditional effect. So in this case, it's just giving you an origin of Lightning Magus effect on the side. Some of these are dual Kismets, aka they require two to be installed, 2 copies to give the effect. Some of them are single Kismets. We see this in the patch notes. And of course, you have then the Undetermined Fates, which Undetermined Fates basically let you socket in more destinies into your tree. Now, I don't know if Undetermined Fates will eventually give you access to more Kismets or not. I don't know what the deal is there. But what we do know is they let you slot in more destinies. Now, the other thing that I'm curious about is if Kismets have a limit. Now, we know they have an individual limit based on dual Kismets, but I don't know if there is like a global limit or what the deal is there. Maybe the 1 and 2 is the global limit. I'm not sure. But the reason I'm not sure that whether or not there is a global limit, because we could see that they also have 2 more socketed here and here. So honestly, still up for grabs on whether that's limited or not, especially because we see 9 slots for them and there's no limit over here on Kismets. So honestly, just something that I'm slightly confused about. If we can indeed have as many Kismets as possible, that would be really, really cool, because that just means that the power that you're getting from battle pets is lower. So I would be very, very enthused about that, because obviously less pay to win. Always a good thing. Now, the other thing that we got is a new hero trait. This is a new Iris. Now, Iris is based on minions, and I believe she does something with combining spirit magi. And she basically combines spirit magi with herself, and then she can like self-cast the abilities of the spirit magi. As you can see from the gameplay here, she's basically controlling the spirit magi. I have personally not played minions in a very long time, and I probably won't play minions. I would recommend going and checking out another content creator if you want like minion content for Torchlight, because I'm not a super big fan of minions. I've never really enjoyed them, but this new hero trait does look particularly strong. We also get 2 new magi alongside. We get the rock magus and the erosion magus, so those are new ones, and it should be pretty cool. So yeah, I would recommend checking her out if you're a minion enjoyer, or maybe you just want a different flavor of minions where you're being a little more active in the playstyle. But yeah, overall she seems pretty cool. Probably not gonna play her, mostly because I'm really excited about a bunch of other stuff. But the other changes are they're basically changing around some legendary gear. Now, if you guys are familiar with Torchlight, this happens every season. However, this season they're not really changing as much. The big change is though we no longer have Imperial Might, and Lone Walkers have been buffed into being ultimate legendary, and they're significantly stronger. And a lot of other legendaries have been increased in rarity, but they're also majorly stronger. A perfect example of this is actually the one that they showed earlier right here, Sage's Insight. Now a ton of minus res on enemies, but obviously this is probably a bunch rarer because these gloves are completely insane. There's a couple of others like Archmage's Hands, which basically give you like 100% additional mana, so that's double mana, and they give you up to 100% additional damage as well. So there's a lot of really, really insane items that have been included. So definitely check out the patch notes for that. But yeah, I look forward to seeing what people do with a bunch of these new uniques. Exclusive support skills. Now, as with last season, we got a bunch of new support skills. I'm going to be talking about some of them in later on this video for what I'll be playing, but there's a bunch of cool stuff. There's one that turns Shadow Swamp into basically an aura that just follows you around, deals a bunch of damage. There's one that turns Bombard into one giant projectile. I believe they show this later on. There's basically a ton of different stuff. There's one that makes all your blizzards release at once, which looks sick. There's one that makes your Moonstrike really big. I'm going to be talking about this later, and it basically makes it AoE instead of single direction. So yeah, super cool stuff. I'm really excited for a bunch of new support skills, especially as a build maker. I love tinkering, so that stuff really cool. Balancing changes, they basically rebalance a couple of hero traits. I'm going to be going over this later in the video, so keep an eye out for that. And then other than that, the biggest change, one of the biggest changes for endgame builds is the damage cap change. So what they've basically done is earlier for the damage cap, it would calculate at a maximum hit, you were only allowed to deal 500 billion damage, and that would be across one frame. So every frame you're allowed to deal 500 billion damage per hit, right? So at most, your DPS would be 500 bill per frame. Now, what this has been changed to is now you can have a maximum of a 1.5 billion hit, or 1.5 trillion hit, sorry. And this is calculated across 3 frames. So you can't have more than 1.5 trillion damage dealt within 3 frames, aka it's still the same 500 billion hit cap per frame that we had earlier, except the actual individual hit cap is much higher. So the reason this is relevant is because earlier what would happen is 500 billion for a lot of skills is pretty doable, but the problem is being able to hit every frame is not doable. Extending that space of being able to hit the 3 frames and keeping the damage cap the same means that if you're playing a build that does a higher amount of damage but hits less frequently, you will now be doing more damage and you are not sacrificing as much by needing to go for attack speed. So aka demolisher skills, basically anything that isn't hitting like a million times a second, right? Huge buff for, I would argue, like 80% of all builds that would ever reach endgame. This is an insane buff. And yeah, should definitely be looked out for. A lot of builds will have a lot more potential. And this will be a lot less limiting now as to what builds can actually do stuff like Showdown 20. There was a new co-op mode. I didn't pay too much attention to this because I'm not really a co-op player, but apparently there's a new co-op mode that you can play with your friends, and it's basically sort of like a tower defense. Think of this, if you're familiar with PoE, it's sort of like Simulacrum from what it looks like. Pretty interesting, but probably won't be for me. Then we have some adjustments. Of course, we got frozen canvas into our basic tree, which is pretty sick. Of course, getting frozen canvas as per normal. Now, one thing I am concerned about is whether or not they increase the drop rate on support skills. I hope they did, because there will be less people doing frozen canvas than there were last season. So fingers crossed on. I'm hoping that they buff the drop rate on frozen canvas. Other than that, though, frozen canvas seems pretty good. You can now chain it back to back, and there is a frozen canvas tree. Basically, you'll just be dropping the snow fragments, and then you can just use those directly to convert to snow paper, and your snow paper will start with all your tiles already done. They changed a couple of things on cube tree. Basically, we were dropping too many legendary slates, etc. And then there's a couple of other changes. I don't want to go over everything because otherwise you might as well watch the original preview. But yeah, not really too many thoughts there. We usually have some sort of balance change. One really nice thing is that they finally updated the looks for compasses, which I'm very happy about because these look kind of outdated and now they look really pretty. So pretty cool. Other than that though, yeah, that's pretty much it. We got a reliquary key. Of course, like I talked about earlier, pack spur changes I was not a big fan of because obviously having things be more pack spur reliant isn't really in my favor as someone who likes free to play. But in their defense, they did give us a bunch of extra battle pack spirits or damage pets that we can acquire this season, and any points that you acquired last season in Supreme Showdown, if you didn't do Showdown 20, will carry over to this season. So looking forward to that. And yeah, that's pretty much it for most of the stuff. One last thing is the progression for your path of progression will now be retroactive, which is good because last season, let's say you completed something in on tier 2 of your path of progression, and then there was a tier 3 path of progression thing that you'd already done, it would not count. You'd have to do it again. That is no longer the case. So this being retroactive, insanely better. Plus they're moving, they said that they're going to move a lot of the like the generic drop quantity and stuff down in tiers, so it's easier to acquire, which in my opinion is very, very important. So kudos to them for doing that. And yeah, that's pretty much the TLDR. Now, to get into what I'm going to be starting, so I'm going to basically talk about two heroes, which I find very interesting, two of the hero changes that I find very interesting, and then we'll talk about what I'm going to start last. So the first thing that I want to talk about is Erika. Erika 1 got a slew of changes. The biggest ones are you get an extra, they basically made these ones more consistent, and you get the stalker stacks more consistently, but the biggest change, in my opinion, is these are now additional damage instead and additional attack speed instead of increased attack speed and increased damage. And this line is now here. Your multi-strike is not interrupted during Stalker. So what does this mean if you're an Erika player? Well, basically what multi-strike count will not be interrupted during Stalker means is if you're moving and you attack, your multi-strike count doesn't change. Now, normally multi-strikes, they build up until you hit your last multi-strike and then it resets. Very, very important because your multi-strike increases, your damage increases with multi-strikes every single time you make an attack. This basically makes it so that it never resets, which is a very good thing because when it resets, you lose a bunch of damage. So you can pretty much attack, move without any issues if you're playing Erika 1. Very, very huge quality of life buff for the way you play, and it'll be a pretty nice damage buff. These got changed into being additional, which is really nice because, of course, increased damage, increased attack speed are additive with other sources of increased attack speed and increased damage. So these are pretty good. This one is most likely what you will be picking, I would imagine, until endgame because this is very easy to actually acquire. You need like 150 movement speed to actually hit this cap. It's pretty simple. So no big issues there. And then finally they changed this to be basically be in line with this. So earlier this was 1, 2, and then 3. Now it's just +2 and then +3, which is a nice damage boost early because this is what you were clicking anyway. And then they just nerfed this, the max the initial multi-strike count for every stacks of stalker. This used to be, I believe this was 3, 2 or something, or maybe it started at 3. I don't exactly remember what this was, but this was basically nerfed so that you don't get two counts, +2 initial multi-strike without upgrading both of these. Now, additionally, they also reduced the negative damage over here, meaning that this is probably a good thing to take early on You probably change this out for Cat Dive once you have like 150% movement speed or higher. But until then, Cat's Punches is definitely the play. Now, with Erika 1, there's two options that I think are going to be very, very strong. The first one is Moonstrike. Now, a couple of things changed about Moonstrike. First off, it got about 25% more damage. Pretty big deal. Actually, closer to 30% more damage. The other thing that it got was this change here. Now, earlier, it used to give you 1.25% additional damage for every 10 mana consumed by the skill, which it has a base mana cost of 1%. Even with like 10k mana, you're not really getting that high of a mana cost. That would be about 100 mana cost or something. And with 100 mana cost at 10k mana, this is only 12.5% additional damage. Whereas now it's 1% additional damage for every 100 max mana, which means this is always going to be 50% additional damage if you're scaling mana, which is very, very important. You kind of also incentivize to build mana with spell damage bonus applies to attack damage. Additionally, they lowered the steep strike chance, but there was a change to steep strikes where they are now just directly linear. There is no sweep slashing anymore. So if you have a 100% chance to steep strike, you always steep strike. There's no sweep slashes in the middle. So overall, huge buff to Moonstrike. Plus, we got new support gems. The one that I showed you in the video, of course, is called Lunar Ring. This one basically gives you a chance to launch a circular attack. Very, very, very strong because Moonstrike has one of the most garbage clears in the game. This would completely fix the gem. And the second one that I really want to talk about is Wax and Wane. Now I don't know if this is gonna work or not with Erika 1, especially because I don't know if the spell bursts from this are gonna be able to multi-strike or what the deal is. But I think this has a lot of potential, and there'll be a lot of theory crafting that I'm gonna do around this later in the season once I can actually afford gear that has a lot of spell bursts. So I'm talking maybe like some point in week 2, I'm gonna be theory crafting with this gem, kind of like messing around with it probably on stream just to see what I can do. Now, if you want something a little more reliable that isn't much more experimental, you could always go Berserking Blade. The reason that I'm suggesting Berserking Blade is because fervor items got a huge buff. Namely, the biggest item that got a very, very large buff is Ghost Slaughters. Now, Ghost Slaughters are a very, very strong item. And basically, these got buffed. They used to be, earlier they would give you 3% additional damage for every 4. You get 1 skill range per 3. But now, they changed this back. In the patch notes, this was, okay, either way. Ghost Slaughters are still incredibly strong. The DLDR for why this is strong is, they changed it here. Yeah. So this gets 1% additional attack and ailment damage for every 1 fervor rating. The reason this is insane is because it's basically double damage at max fervor. And they have buffed a lot of sources of fervor effect. So fervor stacking is going to be very strong. Now there's 2 skills that I think are going to be very strong. For Erika specifically, though, I think you're just going to play Berserking Blade, and I think you go fervor stacking. And for that, you're going to use Sweep, which is additional area for each stack of the buff, and it doubles the buff upper limit of stacks, which is on Berserking Blade, you have up to 20 stacks, and each one gives you 2.5% skill area. So getting 40 stacks of this, very, very big deal. That's 100% increased AoE, as well as from this, you're getting, this goes up to 0.6% additional skill area. So that's also going to be a huge, huge, huge deal. That's about 24% additional area. And the reason that all of that area bonus is insane is because then you run Berserking Blade Rampage as your noble support. And this gives you a percentage of all bonuses and additional bonuses to area also apply to the damage with steep strikes. And because of the new change to steep strikes, you're always going to be steep striking once you stack enough steep strike chance, which means this is just a straight additional damage bonus and an additional increased damage bonus for just scaling AoE, which is very, very good because anytime you can scale quality of life with actual damage is a very, very good thing. The next hero I would like to talk about after Erika is Seething. Now, if you guys have been around for a long time and you guys have been around on Twitch for a long time, you'll know that I was a Seething fanatic. And last season was actually the first season where I never played a Seething build. Seething has been my favorite class in the game ever since its release, mostly because of the fact that you have a permanent backpack. So this is basically the only way to play a melee auto bomber in the game while still maintaining multi-strike, which means it's a very high damage melee auto bomber. Seething got some changes. Basically, you no longer have the wonky backpack trait that activates every time you attack before you get your permanent backpack. Instead, they give you additional damage at additional area. The big thing that I'm very happy about here is 30% additional skill area. I'll get into why I think this is nuts in just a second, but this additional skill area, additional damage, super nice. Additional skill area is something that's sort of very rare in the game to see. because I mean it's a very, very strong stat for coverage. So just getting this additional area is very strong. The other reason that it's very strong is because now when you get your permanent backpack, which is at 45 instead of 60, they swapped the position of these traits. When you get your permanent backpack, the additional skill area means your backpack targets from further away. So your Seething Spirit is going to hit from further away, which is very, very important for when you're clearing, because earlier you would sort of have this wonk where your Seething Spirit maybe only hits like 10 meters away from you, but your Berserking Blade reaches like 20 meters away from you. So yeah, very, very big deal. Now, what they also changed is Growing Anger. Growing Anger used to say 6 to 10 additional rage granted whenever your Seething Spirit uses a skill. Now this is 9 to 13, so already a 50% buff to rage generation at level 1. Very big deal. The big change here is that the interval went from 0.1 to 0.03. Now, this alongside a bug fix, which they earlier when you would build a lot of attack speed on Seething, eventually it would start becoming reduced attack speed for your backpack, because it used there was some sort of bug that was basically stopping your backpack from getting extra damage. So once you went past a certain threshold, you would start reducing your own attack speed, which was obviously bad because you would limit your scaling. Additionally, Growing Anger was limited at a 0.1 interval. So if you kept scaling your attack speed, well, now you're going to have rage issues. This is no longer the case. They've basically put interval at 0.03, where you're really never getting to 30 attacks per second, because that's, I believe, once per tick. So very, very, very big deal. Basically means you're never capped on rage. The other reason this is very, very big deal is 50% extra rage generation at those initial levels. Basically means it's a lot easier to get your permanent permanent uptime on backpack, especially if you deal double damage. The other change here is Split Form is now 1% rage gained for every 40 max life instead of 50, and they buffed the max life numbers here. The reason this is an insane buff, this means you only need 4k life to actually double the amount of rage that you're getting from Growing Anger. And Seething life stacking is, in my opinion, always been the best way to play Seething, no matter how you play Seething. Whether you go deck stacking, whether you go fervor stacking, this has always been the way. So I think Growing Anger plus Split Form changes are insane. Additionally, because you're going to be life stacking, I think Flaming Evil is something people should look into, because this now corroded gives you 3.9 crit damage per fire res. One common misconception I've seen is that this is only up to your maximum fire res. That is not the case. This works for overcapped fire res, at least traditionally always has, and the wording has never changed. So if you have 500 fire res, this is about 1800 crit damage. Very, very big deal. Definitely look at Flaming Evil, especially if you're planning on playing Seething. I don't know how rare this is going to be, because again, they said they were making stuff rarer, but 100% look into this. Now, for Seething, the skills that I would recommend are Berserking Blade. Of course, getting the additional skill area on your hero trait now makes Rampage even better. So I would highly recommend Berserking Blade, but also Focus Slash. Focus Slash typically feels really bad to play as a skill normally, because you have to aim a little bit. But since your Seething backpack will be aiming for you, that makes Focus Slash feel a lot better to play. This skill does an absolute metric crap load of damage, mostly because of this effect, which gives it additional damage scaled by fervor effect, just an extra multiplier on top. So even though the base damage is lower, having that insane extra multiplier is really good. Plus, on single target, you have a couple of gem swaps you can do. Specifically, you would run Tranquility for 130% additional fervor effect, which of course also multiplies this and any other fervor effect you have, aka Ghost Slaughters. And the other one is Behead. This is a really good gem swap for single target, because this makes it guaranteed to perform steep strikes on a single target and just gives you a butt ton of damage, but it makes it only target one enemy. So really bad for clear, but if you're against single target, especially early on, this is an insane gem swap to have. 100% steep strike chance, obviously nuts. And yeah, I would highly recommend Focus Slash. So if you're going to play Seething, life stacking, fervor stacking, either Berserking Blade or Focus Slash is going to be insane. Additionally, if you're playing Berserking Blade, you could also look at dexterity stacking, mostly because you could get movement speed from boots, which movement speed is a very premium stat on Seething, because you can't move around with a movement skill. But yeah, these are the two things that I would look at. Both are completely insane. Very highly recommend playing Seething if you haven't. Should be a lot better than he's ever been this season. Actually was my second contender for a league starter. And it was very, very close between this and what I will be starting. Now, for what I will be starting is Selena. I know you guys are going to be like, the Mermaid just came out last season. She didn't even get nerfed. She's completely OP. But the reason that I'm going to play Mermaid is Thundercloud. Thundercloud got a really nice sizable buff, about 30% more damage at gem level 20 from its old version. And additionally, the big one here is it got new support gems. Now, there's a couple of new support gems that I really like. Specifically, Alarmed Awakening is going to be really nice because this basically lets you consume stacks of numbed on enemies for additional damage for the next 1 second. The reason this is really nice is because you can combine this with Thunder Spike and an activation medium gem, which will let you apply numbed stacks to enemies. So the activation medium Thunder Spike applies a numb stack. You just need a 1 second activation medium, which are usually very cheap. It applies a numb stack. This consumes it. And that's basically the back and forth that you'll have because this is interval and duration 1 second. Permanent uptime, just a 43% additional damage gem. And if you get this to tier 0, it's 50% additional damage, and that's on top of the 20% additional you can get from gem levels, or star levels, I guess, in this case. So very, very good support gem. This is probably somewhere around like 80% more damage because the 20% and the 50% are multiplicative. So around 80% more damage. Very, very, very big deal. The other thing that is the reason that I want to play Selena is Thundercloud Heavy Cloud. This gives you minus 66% duration and minus 33% damage. The negative damage multiplier actually goes lower. I'll talk about why that's insane in just a second. But at baseline, this is about double damage because it lets you generate 2 additional Thunderclouds. Now, even if it was only double damage, I wouldn't be so excited about this, especially on Selena, because it's like, okay, sure, you're dealing double damage, but Thundercloud kind of deals low damage anyway. Why would I play this over anything else? There's 2 main reasons. One, Thundercloud is a hit scan skill, which means if I play a really fast build, this is one of the best opportunities for me to deal damage while moving without actually sacrificing coverage, because a lot of the time when you're playing a skill and moving really quickly, well, your projectiles or whatever it is ends up falling behind you. Enemies die behind you. You have to backtrack for loot. Thundercloud doesn't have that issue. The second reason is because having 2 additional Thunderclouds means when you have overkill damage, aka when I do enough damage to one-shot white mobs and blue mobs anyway, having 2 additional Thunderclouds means thrice as much coverage. So I'm hitting 3 times as many enemies, which means this is going to feel a lot more comfy to play. So very excited for that. The other reason why I think this is insane is because this goes down to minus 28 once you get it to tier 0. Now, this might not seem like a big deal because it's like, okay, you're only getting 5% more, but because this is a negative multiplier, that's a pretty big deal. That's about 8% near, like, more damage compared to this, because you're going from 67% up to 72%, right? 67% of your total damage up to 72% of your damage. So very, very, very big deal there. Anyway, that's pretty much it for my plans and what I'm looking at for season start. I know this is a bit of a long video, but I kind of wanted to get all the information out there. Now, as for my spreadsheet, if you guys are familiar with my Twitch, you will know last season I had this spreadsheet up. It's literally got everything that I ever played throughout the entire season on here. Kind of going over everything. I think I missed out my last Howling Gale update, which was about 800 bill. But yeah, this has literally everything in here that I did last season. So I will have another spreadsheet like this on my Twitch this season as well, where I will be updating whatever build I'm playing. I will be updating my strats, how I'm making currency. I will be updating a couple of like community builds that we see a couple of people make, or community Atlas strategies or NetherRealm strategies, as well as some good leveling gear that I could suggest for my builds. All of that will be on the spreadsheet. As per usual, I will also calculate data for whatever strats I can. And yeah, anyway, thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys on Torchlight season start. And yeah, 07. Bye-bye. And have a nice day.